Harry Belafonte has appeared at the O'Keefe Center 7 times, and 7 times he's sold out the theater. He's back. He opened Monday evening. He's at the O'Keefe until May the 25th. And it's very interesting because there was a comment about Mr. Belafonte. You said at one point that in terms of playing places, that Sudbury could be more fun than Las Vegas, which I really think you have to explain. How can a town like Sudbury be more fun for you than a Las Vegas?
First of all, Sudbury is a place that is made up primarily of working class people who come to the theater with very, very raw feelings. There's nothing sophisticated, there's nothing traditional about theater in a place like Sudbury. It is a multinational community made up of miners, and miners' wives and children. And they come without the veneer, without the sophistication. So everything about them is instant and it's very spontaneous. Las Vegas, the town is it's a facade. Everything is geared towards one thing. In Las Vegas, I am really nothing but a shill. I'm one of the millions of puppets that are there for the purpose of seducing masses of people to come in and to be ripped off in gambling. And there was a time in Las Vegas, for instance, when there was a bit more sanity, when there was a higher regard for the feelings of people, individuals, artists, whatever. Today, Las Vegas, for instance, is one enormous supermarket, and everything is treated as a commodity. And there is no spontaneity with the people. And the artists work from 8 at night until 2 in the morning. And that, of course, is by choice. And the one thing that lures you there was a time when working Las Vegas meant a very attractive-looking statement in your career brochure. It was a step up to something. Today, being in Las Vegas does not necessarily mean anything to your career. What it does, the only thing that seduces you there, of course, are large sums of money. And when I made the agreement that I had in Las Vegas, for instance, it was made many years ago. It was a long-term agreement. This August will see the last of that agreement and perhaps the last of my presence in Las Vegas. I find it non-productive. And when I get to Sudbury, and I walk in and I see people who are really enthusiastic, the way they dress even, the way they come into an arena. It's not even a theater like the O'Keefe. They come in, there's an absolute honesty, there's an absolute desire, there's an absolute wish, there's no preoccupation with anything except what they're there for. And when you walk on, nobody has told them that you're supposed to either applaud at this end of the number or you don't talk back to the artist or whatever it is. And it makes for a great spontaneity, and it makes for a very, very rich experience. And I enjoyed working Sudbury, and Sault Ste. Marie has very much the same character.
We'll take a break on that. We'll be right back with Harry Belafonte, O'Keefe Center, and being in Canada right after this. Harry Belafonte has been talking about Canada and being here, and he's certainly seen more of this country. He's talked about Winnipeg and Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury and Hamilton and the places you've been, but there's a line that was attributed to you once. You were supposed to have said to someone, "It's my teeth. It's my goddamn teeth. I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror and I smile and my whole face lights up." What was that in context, too? What does that mean?
I've had a very precarious life in the motion picture industry. In the early years, although I didn't like very much the films that I had done, the choices in doing them had nothing to do with art or dramatic content. It really, the justification was out of social and political reasons. Later on in life, I was able to exercise a greater concern about art and content and where it was all going to lead. And I had occasion to do a film with Sidney Poitier called Buck and the Preacher, which was a Western with all of the trimmings of a Western and adventure caper. And I played a villain in it. And I loved the idea of getting behind all of the things that make for magic on film. Growing the hair long, the scrubby look, the rascality of the character, the glint in his eye, because he was a con man and filled with chicanery. And we tested, because both Sidney and I were the producers on the film he directed. And no matter what I did, when the character stayed buoyant until I spoke. And then something happened, it crumbled. And I couldn't find the key to it. And then one morning when I was brushing my teeth, it struck me. I said, it's my teeth. It's my goddamn teeth. Because what happened was that every time I spoke or smiled or had to do something, this thing flashed through, and it just absolutely softened the character and softened his look. And therefore, and the camera is a very probing instrument. It makes you terribly naked. And I took my wife's eyebrow pencil and dried my teeth off with a piece of Kleenex and began to shade them in. And in shading them in, I discovered that the distortion of the teeth more and more fed into the kind of look that I felt the character should have. So then I got with the makeup man, and we made a process that would force me to fix my teeth, and it worked admirably for the character.
Can you tell me why? We know that your father was born in Martinique and had been a seaman. Your mother was from Jamaica. But when you were 8 years old, I think, although you were born in New York City, you went off to live in Jamaica, where you stayed until you were 13. Why did the family go to live in Jamaica?
Well, I was born in 1927. New York City during the 30s was a place of absolute desperation. It was during the Great Depression. The black community, I think, was the most seriously affected. There was just absolutely no work. The bread lines, the welfare, the tenement existence. And my mother was a domestic worker. My father was a seaman. And my mother's children, being my brother and I, were left pretty much to the ways of the streets. And my mother was but is a woman of demanding standards. And she came home and saw what was happening to her children, and she knew that she had to work. And she decided that the primitive hills of Jamaica was an infinitely better place for us to be than the jungles of the streets of New York. And that if she took us there, we would be able to survive more readily than we would have been able to survive living in New York City.
Did the family decide that you would return to New York to go to George Washington High School? I mean, was there a plan to send you?
No, I think the war had a great deal to do with that, because England went to war in 39. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was 39. And Jamaica was then under British rule. It was one of the colonies. And my mother had, of course, they all came back. My mother came back to the United States, so we had not seen each other from the time I was 8 until I was 13. And the war made things very erratic. No one knew quite what was going to happen, whether we'd ever get a boat, whether we'd ever be able to come back, what was going to happen to the world. So then she brought her children back. That's when I returned to New York. I went to school in New York, and it was still the same jungle. I went to high school, and as a matter of fact, the jungle existence, for my own survival, I had to leave high school. And I enlisted in the United States Navy, participated in the Second World War, and at the end of that experience, moved into the things that interested me most in life, which was the theater.
There's a story that you came out of the Navy and became involved in the American Negro Theater and the drama workshop, and you were singing in a club in Greenwich Village, but you weren't happy with the direction your career was taking, so you bought into a restaurant.
Yeah, you're almost right. I was singing in a club, not in Greenwich Village, but in Midtown, New York, which was a jazz nightclub. My God, you know a lot about it. It was a jazz club. And as a matter of fact, I was very thankful for the job. A young entrepreneur by the name of Monty Kay ran the most important jazz nightclub in New York. It was the beginning of Dizzy Gillespie, the beginning of Miles Davis, Max Roach. The biggest, hottest thing in the world in jazz was Charlie Parker. And groups like Lenny Tristano came along. And I was a jazz buff. And I would go down to the nightclub all the time. And I went to school under the GI Bill. Government subsidy for the returning GI was what sustained me in drama classes, in drama school. And that ran out. The limited time that we were permitted to have that ended, and I was hard pressed for income. And my friend, who was the entrepreneur, suggested that I come into the club and be a relief singer. And that was only to sing while people were being seated in order to wait for Charlie Parker and the other people to come on, and Billie Holiday and all. And what happened was that this little in-between thing began to turn into something that was fascinating to audiences, and it began to develop. So here I was on one hand, studying Gorky, Shakespeare, Gerrit Hauptmann, Luigi Pirandello, sitting down having daily arguments with Walter Matthau and Marlon Brando and all these things. And at the same time singing Blue Moon, Stardust, and songs that were just absolutely superficial in their content, and it was becoming popular and meaningful. And I was very much afraid that that would be the mark for which I would be recognized. And what I had to do is that I got out of it as swiftly as I could before I became stuck with that identity. And then I just bought a little restaurant in Greenwich Village, which we used 3 artists. We built it because we felt that if we could extract $75 or $100 a week, that would be enough subsidy for what we wanted to do in the theater.
Were the other guys Millard Thomas and Craig Work?
No,
Is that when you met
those
them?
are 2 guys who came in on the cuff.
We have to take another break, and we'll be right back with Harry Belafonte and his restaurant in the Village right after this. Harry Belafonte was telling us about early days in New York and a restaurant, and there were other artists, and let's finish that New York period where you changed the direction of your career.
Well, in the restaurant, for instance, many people flocked in. Artists, singers, Pete Seeger, Josh White. A lot of the little nightclubs in Greenwich Village was around, and I could go down and see Big Bill Brunsey and Lead Belly, and I could go and see Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, and I just absolutely was mesmerized with what I saw these men doing with the folk life of America. There was an inherent drama to the material, and I loved to sing. And I just felt that that was the character of what I should be doing, because there was very, very little work in the theater for blacks. There still is, but it's on a little different level today than it was then. And I took over this thing with the guitarists coming in and playing, and we sang songs, and then I developed this act. And it was a good thing that I did, because the restaurant went bankrupt. There were 3 artists just have no business running a restaurant, at least in those days. And one of the reasons it went bankrupt was that the 3 men involved, myself, a writer by the name of Bill Attaway, and an actor by the name of Furman Phillips, were very political. And anyone who came in that either carried a magazine or a newspaper that its editorial policy ran against what we thought were to the best political interests of our causes and whatnot, we either refused to serve him or did horrible things to his food, which was, of course, a good way to rip off a lot of customers. The restaurant folded. But I think...
Was this your decision or the Board of Health?
As a matter of fact, it was our creditors. A lot of guys that I was in school with used to come down to the restaurant, and there was always this, I just got a call from my agent, and he tells me that next week I have a shot. That's like, would you carry me today? So he said, yeah, you know, they were all fellow artists. I knew them all, so more ham and eggs were signed for than our credit would allow. And these things just stacked up. And a lot of these artists went off and became very successful later on, and nobody ever wound up paying their bill. But I'd say that out of that whole period, There's nothing about it that I regret. As a matter of fact, many things happened that were important to the lives of other people.
Will you tell me when and how you first met your friend Sidney Poitier?
The very first day I got involved in the theater, I walked in to register with the American Negro Theater to join up and to give him my services. I was interested in the technical part of theater. Sidney came in, he was interested in acting. And he could absolutely do nothing. He couldn't speak, he was intimidated. And as a matter of fact, I used to look at Sidney Poitier and wonder what curious psychological thing was there that had ever given him the impression that he could be in the theater. And it was absolutely, he was sullen, inarticulate, and said very little. And there came a play that the theater was doing, and they had run out of actors because it was a wholly contained group. And I was in the technical crew and decided that I would volunteer to fill in until they could find an actor for the part. Sidney Poitier became the understudy. At that time I did, because I was at night, and my work during the day was that I was a superintendent's assistant, and it was very important that I haul the garbage, because at a given time I had to be there to take the garbage, pack it, and prepare it for the sanitation department out of the building. And I paid somebody to do that for me at the garbage time, to take over my duties, because I was in the theater. And the guy who was doing that took ill and couldn't cover for me that night, and my job was more important than what I was doing in the theater, at least for livelihood. So I took off that night. Sidney took over the part. And that was the night when the major domos from downtown had come up to see the play, because we were just getting ready to do an all-black version of a play called Lisa Strada. And they saw Sidney Poitier in the part instead of me, and Sidney got the job. He went and did Lisa Strada, during which time some people from 20th Century Fox came in and saw him and took him out to Hollywood to do a film with Richard Widmark called No Way Out. And that was the start of Sidney's career, and he's never once thanked me for having given him that opportunity.
You're still in America, though. We're talking about friendships, and you. There are a number of causes. Harry Belafonte is not only former jazz singer, folk, calypso balladeer, film, television producer. You've done everything, and you also have the label now of impresario. But you're also a man who's been involved in causes, and at a very early time, not a chic or fashionable time. And it reminds me of an incident that James Earl Jones once repeated, that the man had been working for years, and he opened in the Great White Hope, and the next morning he was the most important American actor in the theater. And there were a number of telegrams that arrived the next day. One of them was from Tony Bennett, saying, "Will you be my guest tomorrow night, ringside," wherever he was in New York. Another one was from Hubert Humphrey, saying, "Will you join and give your name to the People's Committee for the..." And then there was a long cause. And James Earl Jones was quoted as having said, "I was happy to hear from Tony because he was an old friend, and we wanted to go and see him anyway. But the one from Hubert Humphrey really upset him, because suddenly he was a black American.
To be used.
And he was bankable and saleable." What about the name of Harry Belafonte being used? You were the first performing artist that the late President Kennedy ever appointed as a cultural advisor within the Peace Corps. What about the times that people have come to barter with your name?
I don't think anybody in my position can ever get away from that unless you become a recluse. What I think happens is that I then have to make the choice of those situations that I'll permit myself to be used. I think I have that responsibility by the very nature of what I am and who I am to involve myself. So that I expect to be used. I just have to be very astute about what I am used for. I'm not a leader. I'm an involved person and a follower. When Dr. Martin Luther King came along, I saw in him the hope and the possibility for a great deal of the the disenfranchisement which had plagued black people to be rectified, to be corrected. I threw in my lot with him, and I willingly permitted myself to be used both by he and John Kennedy, who was in the administration at that time, because I worked as liaison between the civil rights movement and much of the inner secret workings of what was going on in the movement, and with the White House in terms of articulating each to the other at given times during the movement. There are other things in which I did that, and I permitted myself to be used. But I'm also using myself because it fulfilled me. It fulfilled my sense of being. It fulfilled my humanist interests. It fulfilled my sense of commitment to the community and to the society at large. There was absolutely no question in my mind that if the black people in America were able to fulfill the simple destiny of being a total part of the Jeffersonian Constitution and all that it offered its citizens, that our theater would thrive, that black poets would arrive, that because the community would be freer to express itself. So it touched every area of my life.
Harry, we have to take another break, and we'll be right back with Harry Belafonte and other things right after this. Harry Belafonte is with us. Mr. Belafonte has been talking about a number of things, and I brought up your name and causes and issues. What's most on your mind these days? What's taking up your energies?
Outside of my work in the theater and the time spent with my family, the most important thing to me is what's happening to the Indians in America. And I don't mean, I think Marlon Brando is the first artist that I knew who has been committed from the very beginning and had a way of involving himself very honorably with the Indian cause. And I don't mean to suggest that I am getting on any kind of bandwagon, but there have been a series of incidents since Wounded Knee where the Indians are just absolutely being railroaded by the federal government, where the most devastating things are going on in the courts in the United States with these Indians, and nothing is reported about it. And when I found this out, I became very much involved with the absolute devastating suspension of the civil liberties of Indians and their capacity to defend themselves in the courts of the United States. So that's what I'm working on primarily now, raising funds to help Means and the rest of the men who just are absolutely defenseless. Well, recently they're very lucky because they got William Kunstler to be their attorney. But that's
well, we have to remind people that you're also on stage at the O'Keefe, and you will be until May 25th. And I want to thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Good night. Harry Belafonte, O'Keefe Center, until May 25.